Hello everyone, my name is Robert Brent. I'm a professor of economics at Fordham University in New York and a representative for INPEA at the UN. So today I'm going to be talking about elder abuse neglect. How do you know it exists? How important is it? What's the value that is foregone by all this elder abuse neglect? And we're going to apply it to hearing aids in nursing homes. Is that evidence of neglect, and what is the cost of this neglect that takes place in the nursing homes? So the outline of the talk is that we're going to start off with looking at prior research on elder abuse costs. How does this paper fit in with what work has been done before? And then we're going to identify 3 tests for detecting neglect. And we're going to apply those tests to hearing aids. So the first test is something needed? So this is a test of neglect. Are hearing aids needed? Secondly, even if they're needed, are they socially worthwhile? And then thirdly, even though they're needed and socially worthwhile, have people been deprived of having hearing aids in nursing homes? So what's the evidence? So the result will be that we put a monetary value on the number of negligent cases that we've identified in nursing homes. And this then will become the cost of elder abuse neglect. We end with a summary and conclusions. As we all know, there are 4 main categories of elder abuse. Firstly, there's financial abuse. Secondly, there's psychological abuse. Thirdly, there is physical abuse. And fourthly, there is neglect. Now, in the previous published paper, I estimated the loss of satisfaction arising from the first 3 categories of elder abuse. Okay, so I put a value on financial abuse, psychological abuse, and physical abuse. So the paper was called Valuing the Prevention of Elder Abuse, and it's Brent 2015, and it's given in the references. And the paper used data from Dr. Pat Brownell, who everyone knows at INPEA. I used her data. She shared that with me from her dissertation. And so what I built on was what makes a serious case of elder abuse. The reference cases is still elder abuse, but harassment. So what is worse than harassment from the point of view of the victims? So I've used the preferences of the victims. How do I use the preferences of the victims? I did it in terms of their willingness to prosecute. So there's an incidence of elder abuse, and does the victim report it to the police? When the police come in, they want to know whether you're willing to prosecute. And the argument is that the loss of satisfaction is greater the more the willingness of the victim to prosecute the abuser, who we all know is a trusted family member in this data set. This is family abuse. And this provides a monetary valuation for preventing elder abuse. So non-financial offences were valued at around $50,000 per offence, and we valued non-financial offence by estimating the importance of non-financial offences relative to financial offences. So they're more willing to prosecute one type of offence than another, and that gives the importance. And we found that it took a loss of 38,462 in order to be classified as a serious financial offence. The other categories were slightly more valued than that, around 50,000. Okay, so that's the background for today. So in this presentation, which is a second paper addressing elder abuse, and this is going to deal with the neglect category. which is the most prevalent form of underreported elder abuse. According to Lax and Behrman, which is cited in the references, the self-reported rate was 57.2 times the official rate. So how often is a case reported to the authorities? And it's much more likely to have occurred according to the victims than is reported. So it's a really underreported case. So how do you measure something that is particularly hard to measure? Because you can measure something that takes place, right? If there's harm, it's an offence, you can see that and observe it and count it. But what about failing to do something that's safe or otherwise beneficial? That's going to be conceptually much harder. So I'm going to try to contribute to the elder abuse literature by supplying a test for the existence of elder abuse in the form of neglect. So how to apply the test will be illustrated in the context of a particular health service, that is, caregivers in nursing homes not providing hearing aids to residents with hearing loss. The result of applying the test is that we can provide an estimate of the extent to which the non-provision of hearing aids by caregivers in nursing homes can be considered to be evidence of elder abuse neglect. So let's look at the first test in terms of need. How can we establish the need for hearing aids? In this particular application, it's pretty obvious because they have a hearing exam. And some healthcare professional says that you have a hearing loss, that a hearing aid would remedy. So that's pretty straightforward. So in our data set, everyone in the data set has been identified to have a hearing loss. So this simple test of need has been satisfied in our application. But since I want people to consider the existence of neglect in a much wider framework, we need a more general specification for need that can apply to many cases of neglect. And we're going to explain this way of checking for need. Now, according to Lax and Berman, who were cited earlier, a responsible caregiver is one who provides the activities of daily living of the older person in their charge. So people have basic needs in terms of activities of daily living. So does this take place? So the general specification of a test of need is neglect exists when the caregiver does not provide the necessary activities of daily living. So when does an activity of daily living exist? Some of them are very basic, such as eating, bathing, dressing, toileting, and walking. So they're very basic needs, right? To eat and wash, whatever. But some activities of daily living are higher functional activities that are instrumental in satisfying the basic needs. So when you shop, right, shop for food, that satisfies the basic needs. So that's a higher level. Meal preparation, basic housework, or taking medicine. In this context of hearing aids, what is going to be the activity of daily living? that is going to be deprived, and that is the activity of communication. So that's the higher level basic need. So McCready points out that hearing loss disrupts communication. Right? Old adults in nursing homes need to communicate, and that if they can't communicate because they have hearing loss and don't have a hearing aid, then that is going to be great. So test number 2 is checking that hearing aids are socially worthwhile. So something to be judged socially worthwhile, a cost-benefit analysis is required. And anything is worthwhile if the social benefits exceed the social costs. Social benefits to everyone in society exceed the costs to everyone in society. So the benefits are outcomes valued in monetary terms. So costs are always measured in monetary terms, but now we want to put the benefits of intervention in monetary terms. Now, there are many different ways of valuing the benefits. I have 6 textbooks on it. I've cited 2. One I give to my graduate students, and one a gentle introduction to my undergraduates, and they're in the references. Now, given that most older adults are not employed, we can't really use earnings to measure benefits. That's the standard one in health economics to measure benefits. Right? If someone has an illness, then they're not able to earn. So we need to have an alternative outcome measure, and the relevant one is the quality and quantity of life that an older person experiences. And together that's combined, and that's called a quality adjusted life year. How many life years somebody has, and what is the quality of those years? So when the outcome measure is a quality, then to convert that into monetary terms, we need to put a price on the quality. That becomes a benefit, monetary terms to be compared with the cost. So I don't want to go into the technical parts of that. What I want to go is the underlying philosophy of cost-benefit analysis. And the central principle is that the preferences of all those affected must be valued. So the caregivers, but I want to emphasize here, the preferences of the older adults themselves. And this is called consumer sovereignty. That's whereby the individual is the best judge of their own welfare. It's not someone else's, it's not the government, it's the individual themselves that determines preferences. So I use that principle for the earlier one because we used the victim's willingness to prosecute. So it wasn't some social worker or even the policeman or police officer, the criminal system that decided, it was the individual who has to live with the consequences of sending their son or daughter to prison, right? So how willing were they to prosecute? So it's the victim's preferences. So in this case, we're going to look at the correct usage of hearing aids is, do they, people use these hearing aids not in nursing homes? So do they, in independent residences, do they use hearing aids? And if it's less in nursing homes, that's a sign that something is social worthwhile is being deprived. In the case of hearing aids, there's a companion piece that I did that was published last year. This used the same data set that we'll be using for the empirical part of this study. The benefits of hearing aids increase because if you had hearing aids, increase your quality of life. And I value that quality using values in the literature. And the evaluation I got was that over a person's lifetime, the benefits were nearly $250,000. Now, the lifetime cost of hearing aids, if you had 4 or 5 over your lifetime, was $8,498. So the net benefits were huge. They were $239,927. So in simple terms, right, the benefits were 30 times larger than the costs. So they were clearly worthwhile. Okay, so hearing aids have been shown to be needed. People have hearing loss. and increases social welfare. If they have them, the benefits are 30 times greater than the cost. So the final test is that if something to be neglected, it would be something that will be chosen by older adults if they were outside. So it's deprivation if you don't provide in the nursing home if they would have otherwise been provided in independent. Now there's a complication because there's ample evidence that out in the community and not just in nursing homes, older adults with hearing loss mostly do not wear hearing aids. In a national study, it was found that close to 2/3 of persons with a hearing loss did not acquire a hearing aid, despite the fact that they have hearing loss. And that's been worsening over a 10-year period. Why don't people have hearing loss? Well, some of it's due to education, some of it's due to income, some of it's the hearing loss severity, and some people don't think they have hearing loss even though they do. Okay, so non-use of hearing aids does not automatically provide evidence that neglect has been present, because people may choose not to acquire them. So what is missing in the role of nursing homes is the non-use of hearing aids. If non-use were lower in nursing homes than in residents elsewhere, then neglect would be present, right? Even though they don't universally have it in their independent residences, but they still use them greater than nursing homes. So the main contribution of this study is to fill the gap. So of all the reasons why somebody doesn't use hearing aids is the residential situation important. So we're going to have 4 types of residential living. We have private residences, we have independent group living, we have assistance living, and then we have nursing homes. So the object of the analysis is to determine the extent to which the wearing of hearing aids by older adults is lower in nursing homes, so that's residential group 4, than in the other more independent categories of living, R1 to R3. So for the statistical analysis, we needed data, and this came from the National Alzheimer's Coordinating Center. It consists of a large national panel starting September 25, spread over 13 years. So there were 107,000 client visits, and for about a quarter of these, hearing loss occurred. So that's our sample, the 26,540 people who had hearing loss. And the question is, do they have hearing aids? So it turns out that actually almost 60% did wear it, but 40% didn't. So we want to try to see whether that's going to be dependent on the residents there. So just for the characteristics, 1% lived in the sample in the nursing home, still a large number given this large sample size. So 45% were female, 88% were white, 60% were married, 94% were eligible for Medicare, and the average age was 90 years. Now the dependent variable was 1 if a hearing aid was used, and was 0 if a hearing aid was not used. Remember, everyone has a hearing loss. The question is, do they use a hearing aid? So the main independent variable was residence, which was 1 if the residence was a nursing home, and it was 0 otherwise. And then we had these controls. So we have demographic and socio-economic controls. Other than residence, what else could determine the use? Well, the answer is education, gender, age, race, marital status, and being eligible for Medicare. And the health and medical controls were the body mass index, obesity rates, height, alcohol and cigarette use, and heart rate, and dementia. The main finding was that the usage of hearing aids was 16% lower if the client lived in a nursing home than elsewhere. Okay, so that's our third test. Are they deprived? To the extent of 16.72%, they were deprived. Now we're going to explain how we're going to put a monetary value on any neglect. So basically, there were around million people in nursing homes, 32% which had some hearing loss. So that means that 32% of the million, which is about a third of a million, are at risk of neglect. Now, we've just estimated that 1/6 of that number is actually validated cases of neglect. So that when we apply that 1/6 to that number, we get 592,244 people suffered from neglect in nursing homes because they didn't have hearing aids. So that's the number of people. So to put a monetary value on it, we used the previous cost-benefit analysis. Remember, the benefits were 30 times greater than the cost. The benefits were about $239,000 for a life expectancy of 23 years. Now, for those without dementia, life expectancy in nursing homes was 17.9 years. So we're going to scale back that valuation by 22%. So basically, 78% of that is the monetary value for this group, 186. For those with dementia, the life expectancy in nursing homes is much, much smaller. It's about 1 1/3 of the year. So we scale back the benefits so they only get 6% of that 186,000. So that produces 14,000 for them. Now, it was reported that 65% of the residents in nursing homes have dementia. So 35% don't. So we use a weighted average of those, that 14,000 figure and that 186,000 figure, to get a weighted average of 74,708 per person. So we're going to multiply that by the 59,000 people who are affected in nursing homes to get a national estimate of 4.4 billion. That's the projected loss from hearing aid neglect in nursing homes in the US. To summarize, hearing aids have been found to pass the 3 tests necessary to establish evidence of elder abuse neglect. Those 3 tests can be used generally to establish neglect. Hearing aids are needed. That's the first test. They are socially worthwhile. That was the second test. And the third test, that they actually were deprived from having something that was needed and socially worthwhile. And this was people living in nursing homes in the US. We estimate there were about 59,000 persons living in nursing homes who were subject to this cause. Applying it to the nationally, we got an estimate of $4.4 billion. So this is an enormous loss from this neglect. Now, hearing aids are not covered by general Medicare. This needs to change because if Medicare does not cover them, then nursing homes will not provide hearing aids for all who need them. So these are the references that we mentioned before. That was the prior study on elder abuse for the other 3 categories of abuse. Here's my cost-benefit paper. There was the Lax and Berman paper that I referred to earlier, under the radar, that told us that neglect was the most underreported. Then there was the hearing loss, about why it's necessary. And these are the textbooks that I mentioned, one of the more advanced textbook, and then a very basic introductory book to cost-benefit analysis. Okay, so that's my talk, and hopefully we can ask questions sometime this afternoon.